yesterday when it was very clear in the eye of everybody that there was a policeman who shot an individual at point blank range who is currently fighting for his life in hospital. But then we ask the questions around, do such things need to happen? And is IPOA actually able to carry this out, to then start to ask the questions and demand for justice?
Well, as someone in the justice system, I would say that I don't want to completely throw the baby and the bathwater, but I want to ask hard questions and demand accountability from them as individual commissioners in IPOA. And why? Because they are the ones that, by mandate of the Constitution, they have been handed that mandate to be able to investigate. So in any event, we have to rely on them. The thing is that we must force them and we must call them out to do their job. Yesterday was quite unfortunate. And, the reality is in most cases, IPOA officers are supposed to be deployed so that they watch what is going on. The question is, were they deployed? We didn't see them. Number two, they have not issued a statement yet, so we do not know if they're investigating, if they have seen this, or they're waiting to see the explosion so that they can react. Because as people are expecting answers from IPOA, the people have collated the videos, people have done their own investigations and been able to table. So it's up to them to collate that information, get the, information from Safaricom to correlate who are these people, who are surrounding, who are the other officers who watched. Because it's not just the shooter. His colleague was also right there. And he's an accessory because they went later on and you see them pushing the victim, then they all ran away together. They're part and parcel and they must be held accountable. So what have they done? Have they... we saw the National Police Service issuing a statement. I'm waiting to see the statement that they named that particular officer, though members of the public have already identified him and his family and named and are calling him out already. So there's no excuse. And it's not just, as much as we're calling out the National Police Service, we're expecting answers from IPOA. We're waiting to see their statement as well. We want to see, have they had that officer arrested? And yet he's being investigated. Has he been indicted? Has he been what other action is the National Police Service? Because remember, there is a court decision talking about police, the command responsibility, particularly for the head of the National Police Service, and criminal liability with regards to acts committed by their officers in the line of duty, because they're acting under instruction. And that's why I strongly believe that unless we see change at the top, we'll continue to see this kind of impunity. Because if you even talk about the story of Albert, look at the way Mukwana is so confident as he shares or he purportedly narrates what, in according to his view, allegedly happened. Look at the young boy who was called to just change CCTV. The question is, for somebody to come and change, if it's not a normal occurrence, naturally some would be very scared to do that. But for such meager amounts, they came and did it. Meaning, it's a bigger question of how many times has this happened before? And just look at the rest of the police duty officers that were there. It seems like this is not a surprise. It's just that they didn't expect it to blow up to this level because they thought Albert was the son of a nobody. But there's no one who is a nobody under this constitution. Every person is a citizen with equal rights under our constitution. And therefore, we need to look at the bigger story of what this tells us as a country. We see the continued escalation. And yesterday we saw police working hand in hand with goons, coordinating with goons. And I say the statement by the National Police Service is quite laughable because they say they noted that there were goons and they'll take action. Yet we see police cars driving alongside those goons. We see police, some even consulting with those goons during the protest from the videos and the pictures that are being shared. That doesn't share a story or depict a story of people who are actually worried. And, history repeats itself. We saw this happening when Mungiki came to the fore. They were used by the powers that be to be able to deal with people. Thereafter, what you think these people will disappear into thin air. This is not Aladdin where you puff and they come and they do your dirty work and then you rub the lamp and they disappear. These people are going to be here to stay and they'll become a criminal gang that is going to be a problem in the country. Will we see another situation of killing now of these people when they get out of hand? And for me, it's quite worrying that this is the trend that we are picking. It's like our government never learns. History continues to teach us the same lesson, yet we keep picking up the wrong lessons. And I dare say that it's government that is escalating the current challenges that we're having, particularly even with the youth and the Gen Z. Because when we see the impunity of somebody going to shoot you at close range, you're unarmed, what kind of message does it show you? You're not safe on the X space or on the online space. You'll be picked up from wherever you are. You're not safe on the street. So where do you expect the people to express themselves? It gets to a point that when you push people too much, they will push back. No one is going to accept that we go to an anarchist state during the Moi era of being silenced and being too scared to whisper someone's name. And the reality is that government must accept, and they must accept criticism, and they must see a way of dialoguing with their people without pushing them to the wall. The elections are coming, and even apart from the elections, we're having anniversary of the Gen Z killings, and all they're doing is exuberating already the animosity that is amongst the people, instead of looking of ways of diffusing the current situation. Using vigilante groups is not going to resolve the problem. You're just making the things worse as a country and as a people. And what happens when we have these uprisings all over the country? How many vigilante groups can you pay and try and make them go out to the streets? It's ridiculous. It's unfortunate that with all we say the apparatus or state machinery that they exercise, this is the best they can do. Yeah.
Wakili, when you talk about the formation of vigilantes, one doesn't need to go really far. You just look at what is happening in the Sudan today. The Janjaweed militia was part of the government in terms of making sure that the country, they topple the former president. And look at the situation today. Talk about Haiti, it's the same story. And in Kenya, you've mentioned the advent of Mungiki and how it was being used by politicians to settle scores and what that did. And with the formation of the goons to help the police solve out the issue, like you said, it's not a story. It is not about Aladdin. They're here to stay. And one would look at the command responsibility and the need to just play by the book. And over again, the SOPs, standard operating procedures of police, have not been followed to the core. Today we're talking about the cabinet secretary saying we're installing CCTVs. Dang. The Central Police Station had CCTV that was interfered with by none other than the police, which begs the question. Seems as though the police, some aspect of it is rogue. I don't know if it's in its entirety. There is the rogue police officers. And as a Kenyan today, I want to report to a police officer and be sure that I will be addressed and attended to. But how do I do that if I don't trust them?
And that's the craziest thing about it, because I would even want to go back to IPOA. When you feel like you cannot report at the police station or they stop you from reporting, ideally you go and report to IPOA. The question is, even how do we choose the members of IPOA? I think we should go to a situation where they are competitively selected and they should have been not involved in any political party politics, particularly no connection with the current government of the day. That's the only way we can have an actual independent IPOA that you can trust. I remember when we were having a meeting with the IPOA and I was telling the chair that one of my council members who was injured in the last Gen Z protest, we tried to report at Central Police Station where the incident happened, and they totally refused to take the statement. And this is a lawyer and a council member. So we had to go to IPOA, and we were asking them, what is the status of your investigation? They had since done absolutely nothing. And I was telling them, when we call you out, being my member or not, when we call you out and we are tough on you, it's nothing personal. It's because we have real life experience of having worked with your officers and seeing that you're not doing much. The reality is there's a lot that must be done, because people don't, right now, the trust levels are at a level of we will fight you back, according to how people treat the police now. Because police are now being seen as elements of impunity. And unfortunately, the whole change under the Constitution was to make them independent.
Yes.
But they have become an instrument and appendage of the executive to be willed to deal with members of the public rather than serve members of the public. You cannot change the mindset of the people who you're killing. Of course, they will fight back. You know, it's natural instinct to try and defend your self-preservation. This order that I think is in the mind of the National Police Service, thinking that they will use force to ensure that you submit, is a challenge that we must fight them through our courts. And I saw something yesterday on X Space that we've lost parliament. Executive is a tool of oppression. The question is, they were asking the Chief Justice whether she's also going to go to bed with the executive. And the judiciary now remains the last line of defense to pronounce itself and issue orders, because at the end of the day, no office holder is going to hold those offices forever. It's high time our courts also issue orders to hold people individually accountable, even if the enforcement of that order will be done when you leave that office. That's when we will start seeing people's minds actually ticking and thinking. Because if you're singled out, you're held personally accountable, then you will know at the end of the day you will be held personally liable for these actions, and that the offices that you hold, which are transitory, is not going to keep you safe forever. Indeed. And we've had bold judges who have done that before. I just hope that the current crop of judges, particularly in the Human Rights Division in our courts, are going to be able to hold forth. Because what we're seeing in our country, and I normally say, is that our judiciary should remember that they live in this country. And if our country burns, they will burn alongside it. And unless there's some order that is restored, and it's through pronunciation of orders, because as much as we'd say that they will not obey court orders, it gets to a point that also, you know, as you deal even internationally, people will be asking, why would we invest in a country that does not obey court orders? And hard questions will be asked of the executive, and they will be forced to obey court orders. Right now, we are that quagmire, even I would say of IBC, that gazettement has been done against a court order. And yet the executive says that they obey court orders. And you see, the reality is, at the end of the day, that quagmire, swearing in ought not to be done. Because as long as it's against our existing court order, that should not be held in abeyance. Because that's the only way also courts can pronounce themselves. They may not have police to go and arrest to enforce those court orders. And even, funny thing, even the citizens are enforcing court orders. I was surprised yesterday to see one of the protesters yesterday, Shakira, enforcing the court orders and telling them, remove your masks. The courts say you cannot wear masks. And that's the element of shame, that it takes individual citizens to now take the law to their hands to try and implement. And also courts now need to be brave enough that once they don't issue orders that you're not ready to implement. If you issued orders that people should not use live bullets, should not use rubber bullets, should not use masks and tear gas canisters, be ready as well to enforce and hold those in command responsibility in contempt, because they are violating. That is the only language they understand. I'd
like to take a break at this point and come back, because then we get into a little bit deeper in terms of now where are we going, and looking towards then what ought to happen. The president of the Law Society of Kenya, Faith Odhiambo, is here with us this morning. We will continue when we come back. The president of the LSK, Faith Odhiambo, is here with us this morning, and I know Den's coming in a bit. Just one of the questions that, in this whole line of interrogation and questioning, where we're talking about the necessity to mention the names of the individuals who are involved from beginning to end. And then also we heard, when we saw yesterday during the protests, that this gentleman was shot. There was the insistence, who is he, what is his name, what is his rank, what is his number, all of that. Find out who this person is. And then we talk about the impunity that we see happening, and there have been the calls constantly, the saying that, it's not the entire police service that's rogue or rotten. We understand that. But that there's a chain of command. And if we look at what happened yesterday, one would then wonder, under what command was that operation happening to shoot this gentleman in that manner? Would we then say that that is an individual cop who went rogue, or was he operating under a command where they said anything that comes in your way in terms of any kind of insurgents, obliterate it? How would we then say, okay, how would we explain that situation, Faith? How do we explain that?
I would exonerate the Inspector General of Police based on how tough he reacts to this particular matter. And if he's able to crack down the whip, then we'll have some semblance of belief that those are not orders that were given to, kill, because from the information we're getting from the doctors, there were several gunshot wounds. So it's just that individual was the one who was shot at direct range, and people got a video of the same. I remember seeing also a very gruesome photo of someone who is shot at the spine, and the whole spinal cord is protruding and blood gushing out. So, to say that these are not commands, because we have seen previously situations where the police have really restrained themselves in protest, and you can see that they had orders. And so from a general view, they were just blocking the way. They were not trying to shoot or actually beat or maim anyone. And those, you can see, it's clearly the direction that they have been given, that there's no shooting, there's no maiming of anyone. But yesterday was different. The aim, I think, was to hide under the goons. As the goons attack, then they would shoot. And you see the way the gentleman, he continues to bounce even after shooting, and it's like a nonchalant. It's like, I've executed a responsibility, I've done my work, and now we are going back
to the next.
To the next. And even the way his colleagues also is behaving, it's like that is part and parcel of instructions that were handed down unto them. And so for Kenyans, we must call out for accountability. We want that police officer indicted. We want him to be arraigned before court. We want him to be held personally liable. And, something else, as we are talking even about the individual who was saying he's fighting for his life, his name was one name yesterday, and today it's a different name. My worry is we really also need to verify that information, because you never know if it's the same person who was shot at that particular place, or it's somebody else that we are being told is at ICU. And so that information must also be similarly verified. I think sometimes vigilance is more important, so that you're not fed a story.
From KNH, the latest is he went through surgery in the night and was taken back to the ICU, though critical. They don't have documentation on him. He's still an unknown person. So what they're waiting for is through today, get either the next of kin or relatives to show up so that they can identify. So we know there are names that are floating around. And I agree, it's also good to approach this with a bit of skepticism because of where we're coming from, because there are more than 20 admitted at KNH, some or many with bullet wounds, others with soft tissue injuries. So at this point, it's not clear who this person really is. But sometimes I feel we bury our heads in the sand. For the longest time since last year during the protest, Madam President, I'm sure you are dealing with this different isolated cases, but they all point to one direction. So when deployment is done, there was a story that there was a command because in Kenya, you have standard operating procedures when police are deployed from a police station to quell protests. And how it's done, it's very, very structured. It's a structured chain. So you have the command starting from the briefing of deployment. Then you've got starting a crowd control, how they're going to manage the protesters. Then you have the debriefing now. So the step-by-step in terms of now command is the issuing authority here at this point is the officer commanding station, the OCS, from for example, from Central. Then what you have is, or the officer commanding police division. So this deployment or the instructions for the deployment, they clearly come from the higher command. Usually it's the county commander or the regional police commander, and sometimes from HQ or somewhere else. Now, what we've witnessed from last year is it almost appears there are two commands. There are good police officers out there to try and deter any distraction and try to manage. But you've got another unit that is extremely violent, and they don't give any breaks. So what it appears is there's the proper briefing that is structured from the SOP of the police that, guys, go out there, show force. You can use tear gas canisters, but you're not going to use live bullets, because they have to account when they go back and they take back the guns to the armory, how many bullets did you use? There's an accounting for that. But it almost appears there's a separate unit that is not answerable to the main command. They have another command somewhere else. And when you see the video, for example, when you observe the video of this gentleman who was shot at close range, there were people around. People actually saying, don't shoot, don't shoot. People are filming. But they were not even scared that people are recording them as they're shooting this young man. I circled back to ask this question. Is the law applied selectively? Because when we look at these cases, when they go to court, for example, the IG said yesterday they've arrested this officer. We look at the case of the MP. 49 days later, after he was murdered, the 3 people who are involved have been charged with murder already. We look at the case of Albert. It's how many days now?
This is day 8.
This is day 8?
Day 9.
Day 9.
So Sunday to Sunday, 7, 8, 9. This is day 9.
We still don't have anything structured in terms of where is this case going. But in the case of the MP, it was clear from day 3, day 4. At what point do we then start talking about miscarriage of justice when you're handling these cases? Because what it almost feels like, the law is applied selectively to the politicians or people in authority or power. And then you have people like Boniface or Levy or all these other individuals from last year.
You know, the saddest thing is, yes, there's that definite feeling that police only react and act fast when either it's persons in power or influence, or secondly, when there is absolute public uproar. And we are now seeing even the knee-jerk reactions because of now the public uproar, and people are now on the streets. And the only way to quell the people is that people are demanding for justice. So irrespective of rushing to take one matter to court, people are still not satisfied. You know, there were 2 people arrested. There was Albert, there was Kevin, and to date, we haven't seen IPOA actively even going to take his statement, because they were all involved in sort of the same kind of, the same story with regards to whatever post that had been issued. No one is talking about even ideally IPOA reaching out to ensure that they get the telephone records and track the officers that have all been named, because we want those officers named who picked him up. And you can be able to track their phones and know who they called and get that information from Safaricom, because you can legally obtain it. Who did they call? And you'll be able to see where they were getting the instructions from.
And even where they went.
And where they went and how they were coordinating. So we'll be able to know, where did Albert actually go? Was he beaten up before he got to Central? The OCS says he was badly beaten, and he came in a state, he was almost in a death state. Mukwana is saying something different. And so those records would help piece together the statement, but we are not seeing that from IPOA. And the reality is, yes, it's. I would say that even at the inception of this particular when this government got into power, there was already that wave that every politician that got in with this current government, all their cases were being withdrawn.
Yeah.
And there was a time I remember someone saying in one of our legal social cycles was saying that let's start Kenya fresh, Everyone is given a fresh state. We let everyone free. We'll start fresh. The country is starting anew because it seems there's a cleanup of everyone who was previously in the wrong side. And this narrative of always telling us that they were being politically targeted has to come to an end. Because I always say that it's either the DPP is incompetent and the DCI as well, because if they collated that information and charged you in court, then it means somebody was not doing their job. And the second thing is there ought to be consequences. If you're releasing somebody who had been charged, then there ought to be consequences against you, because why did you bring a fatal charge, or why did you bring charges that you knew you didn't have adequate evidence? And it also means that certain offices are being used to politically fight individuals. So you shouldn't go scot-free. And our courts also should not allow withdrawals. They should issue with sanctions, because that's the only way, because we ask ourselves, who is being held accountable? Where if IPOA bungles a case, who will hold them accountable? What will be the sanction against them? What will be the sanction against the Director of Public Prosecution? What will be the sanction against the DCI? Until we get to that point, then they will know that, before you make certain decisions, you have to really think twice or thrice. And I say, Dennis, that's why we're in this position. That's why people are on the streets, because there's that reality that if you're not in power, it is the people that are empowering you. Because Dennis's father, Albert's father, it is the people of Kenya that have stepped up for him. Even if now we're hearing stories that others have now since come in.
This June, the biggest Club World Cup ever held is here. The 2025 FIFA Club World Cup. Recharge your subscription on your current bouquet for 2 months and get upgraded free to the next higher bouquet for 60 days. A competition across the continent. 30 action-packed days of top-notch football from 32 best club teams from around the world.
The pressure coming down! Jesus. Oh, it's magnificent!
Recharge your subscription today to never miss a moment of a competition like never before. On the move, download StarTimes on and watch every goal, every moment, anytime, anywhere. StarTimes Sports. Beyond passion. StarTimes. Enjoy digital life.
I could talk very strongly the way he issued orders on how a safe cell should be. After the death of a victim in a police cell, I think it was in Kilifi. And we have not yet implemented, and this is a court order, we have never implemented the safe cells. Today, Central and Kamkunji remain one of the hotspots and one of the police cells that are a huge problem. Why isn't change being effected on those places? And even as a country, we will need to take the power upon our hands to call out those in power, to hold them accountable for failing to implement. Because right now you see the budget of the National Police Service, it's quite huge. Look at the budget that has been given to the DCI. They're spending millions on intelligence to be able to track you on your social media space, yet they cannot spend the same to ensure that there are proper cells in all around the country. So in essence, our police are behaving from the premise or narrative that you're guilty until proven innocent. Because we keep having this fight with the DCI of holding people. They are the ones who arrest you and hold you until Monday. Why? Because they want to frustrate you. And yet we have courts of law. Why not, if you know where the person is, arrest them on the Monday, bring them before court, let them be charged, their charges are read. The court makes the determination. They are not the investigators, judge and jury. Because Albert's death would have been avoided if he would have been arrested on a Monday, because they knew where he was. They knew till he's home. And there was no issue even when he was arrested. He didn't have an army defending him or protecting him. They would have arrested him on a Monday, he would have been taken before court, his matter would have been heard and determined, the courts would have, and you see, when Kevin was arrested on the same charges, they drove round with him, and we were following up to find out where he was. And they drove round with him in town and dropped him off because the DPP did not approve those charges.
Right.
So unless, as citizens, we come out strongly on those issues, the IPOA that we know is not an institution that we can rely on entirely to give us justice, unless they are pushed, unless they are also held accountable. Because also those office bearers are a question mark, because when you look at where they're from, it brings a lot to be desired for some of them.
And I think about this, and somebody made a comment the other day, and I thought about it, and I thought, oh, how simplistic. But then as I thought about it a little bit more, then I realized perhaps that's what it is. And he said, you know what? If we all follow the rule of law, if we just followed the rule of law, everybody at every turn, then a lot of the issues that we see then we would not have. And I think that we are still operating with the dregs of a time gone by where the zeitgeist was to have control, was to suppress, was to make sure that people didn't speak. And it was from the hangovers of, a lot of times, colonialism, because we can look at this thing across the continent and it is still happening. The hangover whereby to have elements of control, you had to suppress people. And we seem to have not been able to birth fully that place whereby you can say it is possible to govern within the law, and it is possible to have pathways of justice. It is possible to have the rule of law and constitutionalism operate within whether you want to call it democratic spaces. But we have not embraced that fully. And maybe some would say even for the greater part. How then do we? Because it seems so obvious that these are rules, you follow them and we go with them. But still that we've not been able to grasp that. And this is what we talk about, that it affects everything. The things that you stay up at night, all nights, Faith, trying to do, to say that, no, you shouldn't hold somebody, that if they're arrested, they have a right to have a lawyer. I mean, it seems very obvious, but yet we don't. And how do we get to that point? Because until we do, we are going to be having these conversations. People will be shot in the streets. People will be jailed, unlawfully and all sorts of things until we embrace that. And is that not the conversation? How do we get there?
The conversation should be, how do we hold those in command accountable? We saw the resignation of Japheth Koome at the height of the Gen Z protest. And I feel sometimes that he was just the easy sacrificial lamb to be kicked out. And we must call and demand for the same for those who are holding these certain oval offices that need to be held accountable until we see them leave those offices, so that the next office bearer will remember that if you cross certain lines, you will be held personally liable. Responsibility comes from the top. And as Dennis was also explaining, they get these briefings from somewhere. We can be able to identify, even during the Gen Z protest, the role of certain individuals like Bungei in those protests. And, it's a chilling effect to even imagine him coming back to Nairobi, because we saw the capability and the brutality under his command. And those are the individuals, if they come back, are the ones we must demand that they leave those oval offices. Because if you cannot issue instructions for police to act within the law, meaning that they will also under the command of the officers, because remember, they are also taking commands. They work on a command system. They must obey orders. Otherwise, they'll also be held accountable. These are the individuals at the top who are giving instructions, are the ones that must be held accountable. We have police stations that are known to be stellar in terms of service, in terms of when you look for the OCS. Irrespective when the OCS moves, you will still look for them when you need assistance elsewhere, because they are known for their conduct and they are known how they run their police stations. But they're individuals, even when they are moved from one place to another, the problem and the skunk is still the same. And so those who are holding those particular positions, let them be held accountable. That is the only way you can see change to the bottom. Because going for the small fry doesn't change anything. It's an individual, he's irreplaceable, But those who are holding those command positions, they're the ones giving those orders, they're the ones giving those directions, and they sit and look pretty and wait to sit with you in meetings and give you a lot of PR. And so until we get to that level that courts as well hold them accountable, let them not be able to hold public offices. Then, you see, once we get them out of those offices, the message will sail home. That you sit in these particular offices, you must obey court orders. You must adhere to the rule of law. Because, you know, when you sit and talk to them, they say they train them, they're under the new constitution, they know perfectly well what's their ambits, what they can and cannot do, and they will distance and tell those are rogue officers. But the question is how many. It means then generally a majority of the National Police Service is rogue when it comes to demonstrations. And that's not an excuse. Those who are holding those Oval offices must be held personally liable, because you have the capability of shaping, you have the capability of giving directions, and you have the capability of punishing those individuals when they go beyond what is allowed. Yeah.
I mean, the push and pull, it can't stop. And, you know, often we say we can't be the ostrich, we have to have the conversations, but then pushing for the rule of law, absolutely timely. Our time comes to an end at this point, but we want to thank you so much for being here this morning. And as the days unfold, I mean, I know you'll be extremely busy. We already know that. And we can see it from here. And just very quickly, is it a doomsday kind of attitude if we say that we know in the next coming days it's going to be difficult because we know that there will be protests? The mother of all protests, they've already been told, is going to happen next week. Should we then say that we are waiting to see what will happen so we tackle them as they come? Or can the hope be that in the next couple of days it won't be so bad?
Well, it depends on the reaction by the government. If they continue to use Vigilante, remember, even these protesters have families, they have individuals who stand with them. And if you think you can create Vigilante, you know, these Vigilante also come from homes and come from places where they are part of and parcel of their family members are on the streets. So, of course, they will come out to protect their loved ones. It's not sustainable. It's not something that should be acceptable in this country. And we must even ask questions, hard questions, where are these Vigilante coming from? Because we saw who they were chanting to as they passed offices here in Nairobi. And those individuals, we need to see them being called for questioning. Because if the police are serious, then we need to see them investigating the same. Because you can't have those who are deemed to be your leaders, at the end of the day, are the ones facilitating and getting goons to come and beat up the same people they're supposed to lead in a city. And I would say that unless government starts changing tact, they are only accelerating the current situation. You know, the reality is people will not relent. People are angry. People are dissatisfied. And so if you keep putting more force, because if it's element of fear, then history would have taught us then we wouldn't have fought for independence. Because the kind of killings that were there, if history would have taught us, we would have never had post-election violence. If history would have taught us, we wouldn't have had what happened in the Gen Z protest. And yet we still see people coming out on the streets. And so now that they're even being targeted on the internet space, the reality is you're pushing people from the online space to the streets.
There it is.
So unless our government changes tact and starts thinking of way of de-escalating the situation, then we will have a doomsday, so to say, because to date, the government has not even set an inquiry, has not done any compensation for the victims after several promises. And there are mothers, there are fathers who lost their children. There are some who still lose their children. There are stray bullets that killed young men and women who even weren't on the streets for protests. So unless they start rethinking and, you know, this kind of reaction that someone can come to at close range, at the height of everyone shouting and screaming that you don't shoot, and actually do it in the face of people, shows the kind of impunity that they feel that protection is there, because they feel those who killed during 25th, nothing has happened to them to date, and they are still manning our police stations. They're earning their pay. They're living joyfully and peacefully. So unless we as a country and a nation, and I dare say that, one of the police officers challenged me and told me, Faith, you want the country to burn, and remember you're in this country. I told him, I'm not the one who wants the country to burn. It is you pushing people to the corner. That's why they're reacting that way.
And it can't continue.
Kenya is my country, and I love my country. But I'm fighting for a country that respects the rule of law, because that's the only thing that makes us equal.
Indeed.
Because if you can come before a court of law and get justice, if you feel I've broken the law, take me to court. Let the court make that decision and put me in jail if need be. But you cannot be the one to determine my fate and my life.
Faith Odhiambo, Law Society of Kenya President, has been our guest this hour. Thank you so much for being here. Past the hour, time for the news.